My name is Emily, and I paid the mortgage on my parents' house for over a year, quietly, secretly, and at my sister's request. She promised she'd tell them. She never did, and they never noticed. But one day my golden sister fell face down in the dirt. Before we dive in, where are you watching this from? I love seeing how far these stories reach, so let me know in the comments. Now, let me tell you about the night everything quietly shifted. It started in the kitchen. Not a dramatic confrontation, no yelling, just the soft thud of the fridge closing and my sister's perfume lingering like a warning. The light above the stove flickered as Vanessa turned to face me. Her expression dipped somewhere between panic and persuasion. "Emily," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need a huge favor." I should have known then. When Vanessa uses that tone, something's already gone wrong. She leaned closer, eyes wide, biting her lip like we were teenagers again conspiring about something harmless. But this wasn't harmless. "Mom and Dad, they're behind on the mortgage again," she said. "I've been trying to cover it, but with the blog not bringing in enough yet, and if they find out, it'll destroy them." She let the silence hang there, eyes searching mine. My stomach twisted. "How far behind?" "2 months, but I can catch up," she lied, and we both knew it. "I just need help. Maybe. You could take over the payments? Just for a little while, they'll never know. You're the organized one, the responsible one." My breath caught. For a moment, I hesitated. I looked around the kitchen I grew up in. Same chipped tile near the sink. Same humming fridge. Same everything except me. I'd moved into a modest apartment years ago, barely decorated, still saving every penny. But here I was again, standing on linoleum that had once stuck to my bare feet as a kid, now asked to fund the very house I had never truly belonged in. "They need to know if they're in trouble," I said, my voice low. Vanessa flinched, then grabbed my hands, cold, desperate. "Please, I'll tell them eventually, just help me buy some time." That's when she used it, the guilt. "You don't have kids, you're not married, and I know your job's steady. Just for a few months. You're the only one who can." It hit like a slap. My whole life boiled down to convenient logistics. I nodded, slowly, hesitantly, my voice barely made it out. "Okay." The relief that washed over her face was instant and insulting. Her smile reappeared like a switch had flipped. "You're the best," she whispered, already stepping back, grabbing her bag off the counter. As she breezed out, humming to herself, she didn't say thank you. She didn't look back. She never said she'd tell them. Not again. I stood there for a long time after she left. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. The quiet in that kitchen felt deafening, like the house itself knew what had just happened. And suddenly I did too. I had just agreed to disappear a little more. To let Vanessa shine one more time at my expense. Only this time it cost money, real money, every month, like clockwork. A secret debit that stole more than cash, it drained something deeper. My presence, my worth. But I told myself maybe this time they'd notice. Maybe they'd ask who was really keeping things afloat. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of something. A slow, quiet unraveling, and the worst part, I still believed doing the right thing might finally make me matter. The next family dinner was a Sunday affair, like always. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, mismatched placemats, comforting in its routine. I arrived early, like I usually did, because I couldn't stand the awkward entrance. Walking in late only highlighted how unnoticed I was. Vanessa arrived 5 minutes after me in a peach-colored wrap dress, her hair freshly curled. She swept into the kitchen like a lifestyle influencer doing a brand shoot, kissing Mom on the cheek, twirling a little for effect. "You like the cut?" she asked, spinning around. "It's vintage, got it from this little boutique downtown." Mom's eyes lit up like she was seeing royalty. "Oh, it's so flattering on you, sweetheart. You always know what works for your shape." Vanessa smiled coyly, glancing at me just long enough for me to feel it, like her new dress was an extra layer of armor between us. She leaned against the counter, talking about her blog's amazing growth, how she was about to collaborate with some jewelry brand. I didn't say a word. Mom moved to the stove, stirring gravy. "Emily, honey, can you grab the potatoes from the oven?" I nodded and slipped on oven mitts, pulling out the heavy glass dish. The steam clouded my glasses for a second, giving me a weird moment of invisibility that actually felt familiar. I set it on the table, my movements careful, practiced. This was my role. efficient, silent, useful. At dinner, Dad asked about Vanessa's blog metrics, using the word engagement like he just learned it meant more than wedding rings. I passed the butter, the carrots, the rolls. No one asked me anything, except for Mom once. "Oh, Emily, pass the potatoes again, will you?" That was it. Vanessa got a standing ovation for attending a brunch with a local boutique owner. I, the one quietly funneling money into the very roof over our heads, was thanked with a passing glance and a request for starch. I watched as Vanessa laughed about how exhausting it was to create content and manage her brand. Dad actually said, "You work so hard, honey, we're proud of you." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted metal. The air was cozy, the lights warm, but emotionally the whole night felt slanted, like the house was tilted toward Vanessa and I was constantly walking uphill just to stay in the frame. I excused myself to the bathroom halfway through the meal just to breathe. I stared at myself in the mirror. Do something, I thought. Say something. But I didn't. I never did. Back at the table, the laughter had moved on to some story about Vanessa's high school drama club performance. A story I'd heard at least 7 times. "Remember when you played Juliet and everyone cried?" Mom asked. Vanessa batted her lashes. "That was my peak, huh?" Dad chuckled. "You were the star even back then." I picked at the edge of my napkin, tearing a little piece away. I wanted to stand up and scream, "Do you know who's paying for your mortgage? Do you know who's quietly keeping this whole thing afloat while you applaud Vanessa's sponsored Instagram post?" But all I said was, "More water, anyone?" It was like shouting into a hurricane. After dinner, I stayed behind to help clean up. Vanessa flitted out with a to-go plate and a cheek kiss. Dad retreated to the couch, already flipping channels. Mom started loading the dishwasher. As I scrubbed the casserole dish, I said softly, "Vanessa's doing okay financially." Mom looked up, her eyebrows knitting together. "I think so. Why?" I shook my head. "Just wondering." "She works hard," she said. "It's not easy building something on your own." I didn't reply. I rinsed the dish, dried my hands, and quietly picked up my coat. The moment I stepped outside into the crisp Ohio air, something inside me flickered. Not anger, not yet, but a shift. I had hoped, truly hoped, that Vanessa would have at least hinted at what I was doing. Some acknowledgement, a glance. A toast even, but nothing. I wasn't even wallpaper. I was the drywall under the paint, only noticed when something breaks. That night, lying in bed, the numbers ran through my head. Mortgage due in 5 days. Another $1,342.68. I could pay it. I would pay it. And once again, no one would know. But somewhere inside, a thought whispered, "How long can you keep doing this and pretend it doesn't matter that they don't see you?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay flat on my back, staring at the hairline crack on my ceiling like it might split open and tell me why it had always been this way. Even when I closed my eyes, I didn't fall into dreams, only memories. They came uninvited, like they always did when I let my guard down. Familiar scenes, softly sharpened with age, started to roll through my mind like an old home movie. I was 10 again. It was Halloween, and I'd spent the whole week working on a school project I was proud of, something about ecosystems and rainforests. I couldn't wait to show Mom and Dad, but Vanessa wanted to go as a butterfly princess that year. We didn't have wings, and she didn't like the glittery mask Mom had picked out. So she threw a tantrum in the hallway, the kind that came with real tears, loud shrieks, and flailing limbs. I remember standing at the top of the stairs, holding my project board, watching Mom drop everything and rush to comfort Vanessa. "She's sensitive," Mom had said, brushing Vanessa's hair back while she sniffled into her arms. "She feels things deeper." I didn't feel things. No one asked about the board I was holding. I quietly leaned it against the wall and went to my room. The next morning, the board was bent at the corners. No one noticed. I told my teacher I'd left it at home and got a B. Meanwhile, Vanessa won the school's costume contest. She beamed in every photo. And for days, all anyone in our house talked about was how beautiful she looked, how creative she was. I clapped for her, too, even smiled. I was trained young to keep the peace. Lying in bed now, the memory stung in a place that felt freshly raw, even after all this time. The house I grew up in had always been lopsided with attention, and I had learned quietly to lean the other way to balance it. In another memory, I was 15, honor roll, perfect attendance, even helped coach the science fair for the younger kids. My report card was a thing of beauty. I laid it gently on the counter. Vanessa was 17 that year and got caught sneaking out to meet a boy. Mom cried. Dad grounded her for a week, but it only lasted 3 days. They still talk about how rough high school was for her, how she had to find herself. They don't remember that I never missed a single exam, that I made dinner when Mom worked late, that I paid for my own prom dress with babysitting money. Sometimes I wonder, what would it take for them to see me? Not as Vanessa's shadow, not as the one who always has it together. Just me. The night stretched long. I got up, walked to my tiny kitchen, poured myself a glass of water. As I sat at my table, I reached for the drawer that held a few old things, random receipts, expired coupons, and one faded birthday card. It was from my 25th birthday. The front said, "To a wonderful daughter," in cursive script. Inside, my parents had both signed it, but the message was clearly meant for Vanessa. "You light up every room with your joy and creativity." I kept it as a reminder, not of their words, but of their habits, their default. In our family, love wasn't given. It was earned by being loud, sparkly, visible. I had tried to earn it by being stable, by not needing anything, by being the one who handled things. And yet somehow that made me less. I folded the card shut and placed it back into the drawer. The next morning, I went through the motions: coffee, emails, laundry. But everything felt a little heavier, like my body was carrying the weight of old memories that hadn't finished being grieved. Later in therapy, I'd try to explain this to Dr. Brooks. But for now, I just wrote it down in my journal. What if being invisible isn't accidental? What if it's the result of being useful? I closed the journal, sat with that thought, let it hang in the room with me like a truth I'd always suspected but never said out loud. Outside, the world moved on. But inside, something in me had started to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a quiet decision forming beneath the surface of my silence. Dr. Brooks's office always smelled faintly of eucalyptus and lavender, like someone had tried to bottle calm and failed just enough to make it human. The walls were white, the kind of white that felt intentional, neutral, unthreatening, maybe even gentle. I sat on the velvet chair across from her, legs crossed at the ankle, hands clasped too tightly in my lap. I'd been coming here for 3 months now, once a week. Most sessions were quiet, filled with polite nods and measured thoughts. But that day felt different. Dr. Brooks crossed her legs and rested her hands over a small notepad. "How have things been at home?" she asked, her voice as soft as the throw blanket draped over her armrest. I stared at the window behind her. Beyond it, the city buzzed, traffic lights blinked, people hurried past carrying paper cups and phones. Everyone had a place to be, a direction. "My birthday was last week," I said. She waited, she always waited. "They forgot again." My voice didn't crack, but something in my throat tightened like it wanted to. Dr. Brooks tilted her head slightly. "How did that feel?" "Expected," I said, "but also not." She nodded, encouraging me without saying anything. I pulled at a loose thread on my sleeve. "They gave my sister a set of Japanese knives, like really expensive ones. She's been saying she wants to do more cooking content for her blog." "And you?" "A postcard. From a museum trip they took in May." "Did you tell them how it made you feel?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. I poured water at the dinner table. My hand shook and the glass slipped, spilled all over my dad's lap. Dr. Brooks raised an eyebrow. "On purpose?" "No, but I didn't exactly rush to clean it either." I could still see the way he looked at me, like I had failed some invisible test. "He called me useless," I added quietly. I didn't even respond, I just left. Dr. Brooks wrote something down, then looked at me again, eyes soft but direct. "What do you want from them, Emily?" It wasn't a loaded question, but it hit like one. I blinked. No one had ever asked me that, not seriously. "I don't know," I whispered. "To be noticed, I guess, not as the one who fixes things, not as the backup plan, just for me." "And do you think taking over the mortgage was a way to get that recognition?" I looked down at my hands. "Yes." The word came out before I could second-guess it. I thought maybe if they realized how hard I was working to protect them, they'd finally see me, say thank you, acknowledge it even if just in passing. And did they? No, they never even suspected. Silence stretched between us like a pause in a conversation I didn't want to restart. "You know," I said after a while, "I'm not even mad at Vanessa for asking me. I think I expected her to be who she's always been, but I guess I thought she'd tell them. Or at least try." Dr. Brooks leaned forward slightly. "Have you ever told Vanessa how it made you feel?" I shook my head. "She wouldn't get it. She's always been the center, the favorite, and I'm just the quiet one who steps in when things fall apart." A flicker of something stirred in me then, like a light coming back on in a long-abandoned room. I used to think being the strong one was noble, like if I didn't complain, didn't burden anyone, they'd love me for it. And now, I looked up, met her eyes. Now I think maybe they just forgot I existed. That was the moment, not dramatic, not tear-filled, just a soft realization settling into place like dust on an untouched bookshelf. Dr. Brooks didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it breathe. "Let me breathe. You deserve to be seen," she said. "Not because of what you do, but because of who you are." And for once, I believed it just a little. It was the first time I walked out of therapy without feeling like I'd failed at feeling. I didn't have answers yet, but I had admitted something that had lived in my chest for decades. And that alone felt like the beginning of a change I hadn't even known I was allowed to want. After that session with Dr. Brooks, I expected something inside me to shift dramatically. It didn't. Life went on the way it always had, like nothing had been said, like I hadn't finally named the invisible bruise I'd carried since childhood. That's the thing about quiet realizations. They don't kick down doors. They just sit beside you, watching how long you'll let the world ignore them. The mortgage payments continued. Every first of the month, like clockwork, the money left my account. I'd started keeping records, organized by date and confirmation number, tucked neatly into a green folder labeled for them. At first, I thought of it as evidence, proof that I mattered. But the longer I added to the stack, the more it began to feel like a diary no one would ever read. Family events blurred together. Birthday dinners, Sunday brunches, Vanessa's blog launch party, which was held in the very house I was paying for. She lit candles, posed for selfies in front of a balloon arch, posted a story with the caption, "Built this from the ground up, boss life." I watched from the kitchen, holding a tray of mini quiches I'd picked up on my way there. No one asked if I had any updates from work. No one asked if I was seeing anyone, or if I was okay. Not that I expected them to. I had perfected the role of Emily who doesn't need anything. It was easier for everyone that way. Even in therapy, my voice still wavered when I tried to speak plainly. Dr. Brooks would ask how I was feeling, and I'd stare at the carpet, searching for a word that didn't sound too dramatic or too soft. Most weeks, I'd say something like, "It's fine. Everything's manageable." Manageable. What a quiet, tragic word. I once read that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And that's what my life had become. A long series of indifferent nods, of being passed over in favor of brighter lights and louder voices. Vanessa shined. She always had. And me, I just made sure the lights stayed on. Literally. At work, I was reliable, steady. A woman who triple-checked spreadsheets and never missed a deadline. My boss called me low maintenance once in a meeting and meant it as a compliment. I smiled, pretended it didn't sting. Even the bank didn't notice me, just the payments. The system never thanked me, but it never missed me either. One Saturday morning, I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, sorting through that green mortgage folder. Every page was accounted for. Not a single payment late. Not once. I sipped lukewarm coffee, the quiet humming around me like static. I wondered what would happen if I stopped. What if the payment just didn't go through next month? Would Vanessa panic? Would my parents call the bank? Would anyone ask why? The thought didn't feel vengeful. It felt scientific, like I was testing a theory. If I disappeared from the equation, would the balance shift? Or would they simply blame the math? I stared at the folder, heart suddenly heavy in my chest. Would they care? And worse, what if they did? I put the folder away, sat there for a while. The day moved around me like weather. No calls from Vanessa, no texts from Mom, no emails from Dad. The only person who checked in that weekend was Dr. Brooks. She sent a reminder for our Tuesday appointment and a little quote that said, "You are allowed to take up space." I read it twice. then closed my phone. Because even though I wanted to believe her, even though I'd spoken the words in therapy, real life was quieter, colder, and I was still just a ghost in my own family's story. It was a Saturday morning in April. The kind of morning that pretends it's spring but still bites your skin if you forget your jacket. I opened my windows anyway, needing the chill, the realness of it. My apartment smelled like fresh coffee and lemon cleaner. I just finished mopping the floor when I saw the envelope. It was from the bank. Not a warning, not a thank you, just the monthly statement. I'd signed up for digital delivery, but they still sent paper copies, which always felt ironic. As if the house itself wanted proof that someone still cared. I opened it, skimmed the familiar numbers, and filed it away into the green folder. I knew that folder better than I knew my own medical history. It was the most organized part of my life. Inside were 12 months of silent proof, line by line, dollar by dollar, $1,342.68. Every single month, on time, without applause. I pulled the folder out and laid it on the floor in front of me. Then I just stared. It looked harmless, ordinary, but to me it was heavy. It held sacrifices I hadn't named and a longing I hadn't admitted until very recently. I ran my fingers over the smooth paper, page after page, as if I might find a secret message hidden between the digits. But there was nothing, just numbers, clean and cold. What I really wanted, what I had always wanted, was not in those pages. I closed the folder gently and looked around my apartment. Small, clean, quiet. There was no glitter, no followers, no sponsored content, just me. A bookshelf full of novels I never lent out. A plant I kept alive despite myself. A space that was mine even if no one ever praised it. And in that moment something small and dangerous rose up inside me. Not rage, not even sadness. Just a flicker of a question, what if I stopped? Not out of revenge, not to make a point, but simply. Because I could, because maybe the only person who owed me anything now was me. I imagined skipping a payment. I imagined what would happen not to them but to me. Would I feel guilty? Would I feel free? I didn't know. But the wondering alone felt new. Rebellious, even. A tiny piece of me that had been asleep for years stirred. I glanced over at the kitchen table where my laptop sat open with my budgeting spreadsheet. I'd updated it that morning like I always did. Every cell color-coded. Every expense accounted for. It was a ritual, a comfort. And yet that folder, my quiet monument to loyalty, sat there daring me to let go. I picked it up and held it to my chest. Then I whispered, "I've done enough." The words startled me because I meant them. For the first time, I truly, deeply believed them. I had done enough. I hadn't been thanked. I hadn't been seen, but I had done enough. I placed the folder back in its drawer, shut it with care, and let the silence settle around me. No applause, no witnesses, just the quiet pulse of something shifting inside me. Like maybe, just maybe, the next chapter didn't have to be about earning anything. Maybe it could be about choosing. My birthday came with the usual silence. No early morning calls, no unexpected flower deliveries. No cake, no candlelight, not even a group text. Just a slow drip of indifference disguised as routine. Vanessa posted a story about her Sunday reset, lavender lattes, a bubble bath, and a 3-minute time-lapse of her tidying her already pristine kitchen. It had nothing to do with me. It never did. She didn't even text. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I didn't need balloons or presents or to be the center of anything. I told myself this was normal, that I was used to it. And yet, when I stepped into my parents' house that evening, the way my mother's eyes lit up when she saw Vanessa's new handbag made something in me wilt. "It's imported," Vanessa said, holding it up like a trophy. "One of the boutique sponsors sent it over." "It's so elegant," Mom cooed, running her fingers along the gold clasp. "You always have such taste," Dad added, sipping his tea like he hadn't skipped calling his other daughter altogether. I stood there with a bottle of wine in one hand and a grocery bag of salad ingredients in the other, like a guest no one had invited, but no one had the heart to turn away. They didn't ask about my birthday, didn't mention the date at all. At dinner, Mom had made her usual pot roast. Vanessa talked about brand deals and her next photo shoot. I poured water into everyone's glasses, I always did. When I reached my father's glass, my hand began to shake. Just a tremor, barely noticeable. The glass tipped, just slightly. A splash landed on his khaki slacks, spreading like ink across a napkin. He looked down, then up. His eyes narrowed. "You are a useless daughter," he muttered under his breath, but not low enough for me to miss it. No one gasped. No one defended me. Not even a second glance from Vanessa, who was too busy cutting into her roast. The room went still, but not in the way that waits for an apology. It went still the way a moment does right before a bridge snaps. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I just froze, and then I nodded, silently, like I'd just been given final confirmation of something I already suspected. I placed the pitcher on the table, excused myself, and walked slowly, calmly to the bathroom. Once inside, I stared at myself in the mirror. Water trembled in my eyes but didn't fall. This is what being invisible feels like, I thought. It isn't dramatic, it's quiet. A slow erosion, a vanishing. I splashed my face with cold water, dried it, and stepped out. The hallway smelled like roasted carrots and thyme. Somewhere down the corridor, Vanessa was laughing. I didn't go back to the table. I picked up my coat from the hook, stepped into my shoes, and walked out the front door. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. As I drove home in silence, something clicked into place with frightening clarity. Not anger, not even heartbreak. Resolve. The kind that doesn't shout or demand. The kind that sits quietly in your chest like a pact you've made with yourself. I would stop paying the mortgage. Tonight. Not out of cruelty, not to punish them, but because I had finally accepted something I had resisted for most of my life. I could never give enough to earn love that was never mine to begin with. And maybe I didn't have to. Maybe letting go wasn't failure. Maybe it was freedom. Weeks passed. Not dramatic weeks, no slammed doors, no stormy confrontations. Just the slow tick of ordinary days, the kind that slip past so quietly you barely notice they're changing everything. The first of the month came and went. This time, there was no payment. I watched the mortgage draft fail on my banking app. A little red exclamation point appeared next to the transaction as if it were surprised. I was. I closed the app and made a cup of tea. No one called. No one noticed. Or at least, no one said anything. And that silence was its own kind of revelation. I had stepped out of a role I'd never auditioned for but always played. And no one came looking for the understudy. I half expected Vanessa to send a panicked text or try to charm her way into another plea. She didn't, which meant either she hadn't noticed, or worse, she had and still chose not to speak. At first, I felt lighter, unburdened. I cooked for myself without watching the clock. I played music while I cleaned, danced a little in my kitchen just because no one was watching. But then Sunday came, another family dinner. I debated skipping it, but some part of me wanted to be there, to see how the story would unfold without my silent contributions. I brought a pie, not because they asked, but because I always did. The house looked the same, like a memory refusing to fade. Porch light glowing, wreath still on the door from Easter. Vanessa's car parked out front, sleek and spotless. Inside, the air was thick with roast chicken and passive cheer. Mom was setting the table. "Oh, good you're here," she said without looking up. "Vanessa's been telling us about how overwhelmed she is. Her schedule is just packed." I replied, placing the pie in the kitchen. No one asked how my schedule was. Dad was already seated, reading headlines off his tablet between sips of coffee. Vanessa scrolled her phone at the counter, perfectly manicured nails tapping the screen. Dinner started like every other. Vanessa dominated the conversation with updates from her blog, how she might launch a podcast, how exhausting it was to manage growth. Dad nodded along like she was reciting gospel. I sat, fork in hand, wondering how many months of my money had funded this room's heat, this table's food, this illusion. They didn't know the warmth they enjoyed had been lit by someone they never thanked. But I wasn't bitter, just observant. I chewed slowly, waited for it. And then it came. Midway through the meal, Dad looked up, fork frozen midair. "Vanessa," he said slowly, "didn't the bank call about the mortgage?" She blinked, paused. "What?" "The mortgage," he repeated. "You said you were handling it. They called me Friday. Said last month's payment was missed, now this one too." The room shifted. You could almost hear it, the delicate snap of a thread unraveling. Vanessa's jaw tightened just enough to be seen. "Oh, yeah, that. I meant to call them back." Mom furrowed her brow. "You said you were taking care of it." "I was," Vanessa said quickly. I mean, I thought I was, it's just I've been swamped. Dad set his fork down, swamped enough to forget 2 mortgage payments. I didn't forget. Vanessa snapped, then caught herself. Look, maybe there was a mix-up with my account. A lie, so weak it practically dissolved on her tongue. I didn't say a word, I just sipped my water and waited. Mom looked between them. You've been paying it, haven't you? Silence. Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came out. I watched her scramble, mentally, emotionally, searching for something to stitch the lie back together. But it was too late. Her silence was louder than any confession. Mom's eyes darted to me. Not accusing, not yet, just searching. Like she suddenly realized there had been another player in this game the whole time. And I just sat there, letting the truth arrive without ceremony. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just let the weight fall where it always should have. Vanessa looked down, cheeks flushing, twisting her napkin into knots. Dad exhaled slowly. So if you haven't been paying it, then who has? The room stilled, and I didn't move. I didn't have to, no one spoke. The silence at that table was thick, coiled like the final breath before a storm. Vanessa's hand trembled slightly as she set down her fork. I was managing it for a while, she mumbled, eyes fixed on her plate. But there were complications with my income, and I thought it would bounce back. You didn't think to tell us? Dad snapped. I didn't want you to worry, she said quickly, clinging to her usual excuse like it was life-saving debris. I was protecting you. I didn't flinch. I'd heard that line before. It was the same script she used when she crashed Mom's car senior year, when she forgot to apply for college but blamed emotional burnout, when she spent half her student loan on designer handbags. Protection was her favorite euphemism for lying. I've been meaning to fix it, she added. Just got a little behind. Behind by how many months? 4. 4 payments, almost $5,500. I knew the number by heart because I'd paid it, right up until I didn't. Dad's expression had darkened to something I'd only seen once before, the day Vanessa faked appendicitis to get out of summer camp. That same cold fury, laced with disbelief and disappointment. But now it wasn't just a child's prank. This was their home. Mom's voice was trembling when she finally spoke. So, if you haven't been paying it, who has? Vanessa swallowed. I mean, I thought maybe it was just being automatically paid from savings or something. A weak deflection. A lie so fragile it collapsed under its own weight. Their eyes turned toward me again. It was almost funny how in that moment they looked at me like I was a stranger, not the daughter they'd half forgotten, not the shadow that hovered at family dinners, but someone suddenly central. I took another sip of water before I answered. I paid it. The words were soft, but they dropped into the silence like a hammer. For over a year, I added. Vanessa asked me to. She didn't want you to worry. No one moved. Even the air seemed stunned. You paid our mortgage? Dad asked, each word slow, like his mouth had to convince itself. I nodded. Starting last March. Mom's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. But why didn't you say anything? Because I was told not to, I said simply, glancing at Vanessa, who now looked like she wished she could shrink under the table. I thought it was temporary, I continued. Just until things stabilized, I thought. Maybe this time I'd finally be appreciated for helping. Vanessa stood suddenly, pushing her chair back with a screech. Don't make this about you, she spat. You offered to help. I met her eyes calm, unwavering. No, you cornered me in the kitchen, you cried, you said you couldn't let them down, and I said yes because I thought you'd eventually be honest. Vanessa's face turned red. You didn't have to keep doing it. You're right, I said. I didn't, so I stopped. The silence returned, but now it wasn't passive. It was buzzing, active, like the moment just before glass shatters. Mom clutched her napkin like it was anchoring her to the earth. Emily, why didn't you come to us? I hesitated. Then I said, because I didn't think you'd believe me, or worse, care. The words hung in the air, unblinking. Dad leaned back slowly in his chair, the full realization dawning. His eyes, sharp, tired, met mine with something I'd never seen from him before. Not anger. Not dismissal. Not condescension. But shame. Real, raw shame. He looked down, rubbing his temples. All this time, and we never even asked. No, I said quietly. You didn't. Vanessa scoffed, grabbing her phone off the table. This is so dramatic. You always want to play the martyr. You act like no one sees you, but maybe you like it that way. I didn't respond because I didn't need to. Her words were flimsy now, brittle and transparent, and the room wasn't on her side anymore. Mom stood slowly, her face pale. She walked over to the sink, turned the faucet on, then off, doing something just to fill the space. She looked smaller than usual, older. "I think you should go," she said without looking up. For a moment I didn't know who she meant, but then I saw the way Vanessa froze. "What?" "I need time to think," Mom whispered. "I can't talk to you right now, not after this." Vanessa looked at Dad for backup, but he said nothing. His hands were folded, eyes distant. And that was it. Vanessa grabbed her purse, muttered something under her breath, and stormed out. The door slammed behind her. I sat there, still holding my water glass, my heart thudding in my chest, not with triumph, but with something else. Something closer to release. My mother turned to me, her voice cracked. "Emily, I'm so sorry." The next few days unfolded like a strange dream. Not a nightmare, not a fantasy, just something surreal. For the first time in years, my phone rang, and it wasn't a robocall or a group chat pinging about someone else's plans. It was my mother. "Just checking in," she said on Tuesday. "I made soup. Thought I could drop some off if you're home." I wasn't sick. I hadn't asked for anything. But she showed up anyway, standing awkwardly on my doorstep with a Tupperware container and eyes that couldn't quite meet mine. I let her in. We sat on the couch. The soup sat untouched between us like a peace offering from another planet. She talked about weather, about how the neighbors were finally redoing their porch, about how my dad had been quiet since Sunday. And then, after a long pause, she said, "I didn't know about the payments." "I know," I said. "We should have asked." I didn't say anything, because what could I say? Asking would have required seeing me. And for most of my life, that hadn't been part of their vocabulary. Mom ran her hand down the leg of her jeans, smoothing out a wrinkle that wasn't there. "Your father feels terrible." I nodded. "He said I was a useless daughter." Her face crumpled. "He didn't mean—" "But he did," I said softly. And it wasn't the first time. She closed her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. I didn't want them anyway, not yet. She began, then stopped. "We always thought you were okay, that you didn't need much." "I didn't say much," I corrected. She looked at me, really looked. And that was the first time I saw it, that flicker of recognition. The realization that her quieter daughter had been carrying more than anyone guessed. And maybe she always had. After she left, I stood in the doorway for a long time. The soup was still warm. I put it in the fridge and sat down with a strange heaviness in my chest. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated, seen. But what I felt was unsettled. Because when you spend years being invisible, being noticed isn't always a comfort. It can feel like a spotlight you never wanted. At work, even my posture shifted. I caught myself walking taller, speaking more in meetings. My boss complimented a report I submitted, and I didn't deflect. I just said thank you and let the words sit. In therapy, I told Dr. Brooks everything. The dinner, the silence, the confession, and how afterward I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. "I thought being seen would feel like winning," I said. She nodded. But it feels like being on stage without knowing your lines." Dr. Brooks smiled gently. "Sometimes being seen isn't the finish line, it's the start of a very different story." I mulled that over for days, and in the meantime, the calls kept coming. Dad on a Thursday night, his voice strained, too formal. "Hey, kiddo, just wondering if we could talk, maybe lunch." He called me kiddo. That was new, or maybe old. Maybe I'd just forgotten. We met at a diner off Route 57, neutral territory. He looked smaller in the booth than I remembered, less sure of himself. "I want to apologize," he said, fingers tapping the edge of his mug. "What I said, I was angry, but that doesn't excuse it." I nodded slowly. "You believed Vanessa without asking for over a year." His face tightened. "I know. You believed she was handling the finances and that I was doing nothing." He looked down. "I'm sorry." And for once, it sounded like more than just words. "I used to think," I continued, "that if I did enough, gave enough, disappeared enough, eventually someone would say, 'Hey, she's important.' But that moment never came until I stopped giving." He swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have had to pay to be seen." I blinked. That line, that exact sentence. He said what I hadn't yet been able to admit out loud. We sat in silence for a while. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I reimbursed the payments," he said. Everyone with interest. I stared at it, my chest tightened. I didn't do it for that, I whispered. I know, that's why it matters. I didn't reach for the envelope, not yet. I needed a moment to feel what this was, this shift, this subtle tilt in the ground beneath us. Dad looked at me, his face more weathered than I'd noticed before. Emily, I'm proud of you. I just wish I'd said it sooner. So did I, but at least now, I wasn't the only one carrying the weight of that wish. I didn't cash the envelope right away. It sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days, unopened, the flap sealed with both apology and guilt. I didn't need the money, not anymore. That wasn't the point. What I wanted, and had always wanted, couldn't be folded into paper or measured in reimbursement. But still, I left it there, beside my keys and a chipped mug of pens. Just visible enough to remind myself that something had changed. Not in them. In me. The following Sunday, the family dinner felt different before I even walked through the door. The lights were dimmer. The music was lower. The usual cheer was replaced with something cautious. No one laughed too loudly. No one filled the space too quickly. Vanessa wasn't there. I noticed her absence before anyone said a word, but no one rushed to explain. Her name hung in the air like an unlit chandelier, visible but no longer the centerpiece. Instead, my mother met me at the door with a nervous smile and a new tone I hadn't heard from her before. Warm, tentative, curious. "We tried a new recipe," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. "Thought you might like it." I nodded, setting my purse down. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic. We sat around the same table, the chairs in the same order, the plates the same. But the energy completely different. Dad asked about my job. Mom asked how I'd been sleeping. And when I answered, they listened, not like they were waiting to speak, but like they were actually taking me in. At first, I didn't know how to respond. I felt myself scanning the moment for traps, for sarcasm, for performative concern. But none came. They were trying. And that alone disarmed me more than anything. Halfway through the meal, my mom reached for her water, then looked up and said, "You know, I think we've been looking at things backwards." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "We always thought Vanessa needed the most attention, that you were okay being quiet, but I think we misunderstood what quiet really meant." My chest tightened. Dad cleared his throat. "You shouldn't have had to carry all that alone." I wanted to tell them I forgave them, that it was okay, that we could move on now. But the truth was, I wasn't there yet, so instead I said, "Thank you," and let that be enough, because for once the silence wasn't mine to fill. Later, when I helped clear the table, Mom touched my arm and said, "She's not coming for a while, Vanessa. She said she needs space." I nodded slowly. "She's not angry," Mom added, "just embarrassed." I didn't respond. I wasn't angry either. But I wasn't going to bend backward to fix her discomfort. Not this time. The rest of the evening passed like a gentle wave, washing over years of ignored pain with small gestures. A second helping of dessert, a shared look during a commercial break, a quiet goodbye at the door that felt intentional. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost in that house. I felt present, not praised, not pedestaled, just seen. And that somehow felt like the rarest gift of all. I didn't tell anyone when I stopped keeping the green folder on my desk. I just moved it. One Saturday afternoon, while dusting the shelf where it had sat for over a year, I picked it up and slid it into the bottom drawer of a file cabinet I barely opened. No ceremony. No final glance. I didn't need it anymore. It had served its purpose, proof of something I no longer needed to prove. That night, I made myself a simple dinner and sat at my small kitchen table, not watching a show or scrolling my phone, just eating, breathing, letting the quiet feel like peace instead of punishment. It was a new kind of silence, one I'd chosen. In the weeks that followed, my parents called more frequently, sometimes just to say hi, sometimes to ask if I wanted to come by for lunch or help Mom choose paint colors for the hallway. It wasn't perfect. The rhythm was awkward, like we were all trying to learn a new dance, but they were reaching. And for once, I wasn't the only one extending a hand. Vanessa's name came up only once, casually. Mom said she was figuring things out, and I nodded, letting the topic drift away like fog dissolving in the sun. I wasn't holding a grudge, but I wasn't offering an easy return either. Let her do the work this time. Dr. Brooks and I talked about that, what forgiveness looks like when it's not an obligation but a choice. She said it was okay to take my time, to feel the relief before rushing into reconciliation. "You can forgive someone," she said, "and still protect your peace." So I did. I forgave quietly without confession or confrontation. I simply let the weight go, and in its place something new began to grow. I started reading again. Books that had been gathering dust on my shelf, stories with heroines who weren't always brave but became brave by refusing to disappear. I walked more, around the block, then farther, sometimes with music, sometimes just with my thoughts. I stopped shrinking. Even my space began to reflect that change. One Sunday, I repainted the living room wall a soft green, lighter than the mortgage folder, but rich and calm. I bought a plant and named her June. I hung up a photo of myself from college, not because I looked perfect in it, but because I remembered how hopeful I'd felt that day. I started building a life that wasn't about proving my worth through sacrifice. It was about choosing myself. One morning, while journaling something Dr. Brooks had gently encouraged, I wrote something that surprised me. I used to pay to be seen. Now I live in full view for myself. I stared at the words, then underlined them. Because for the first time, they felt true. There was no parade, no social media glow-up, no dramatic confrontation, just steady, personal victory, quiet power. I had once thought recognition was everything, that if I could just be acknowledged, the ache inside me would dissolve. But it wasn't the attention that saved me. It was the choice to stop waiting for it. It was choosing to see myself, to care for the woman who had carried everyone else quietly for so long. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most powerful kind of transformation there is. A year later, I live in a condo with soft light, quiet mornings, and no green folders. The rent is mine. The walls are painted sea glass blue. There's a balcony just big enough for a chair and a potted rosemary bush I haven't killed yet. It's not fancy, but it feels like me. On Sunday mornings, I sip coffee in the sun and listen to the wind. I don't check for messages before I finish my first cup. The world can wait. Sometimes, when I catch myself humming while I wash dishes, I pause, not because I'm surprised, but because I'm glad to be here. In this skin. In this life I shaped from silence and choosing. My parents call every week now, not out of obligation, not with awkward apologies, just to ask how I am. My mother tells me about a new recipe she's trying. My father asks if I caught the local news. It's ordinary, so ordinary it might break your heart if you knew what came before. We don't talk about Vanessa much. She and I haven't spoken directly since that night. I'm told she's moved out of state, working on something new. Rebranding, maybe. Finding herself. That's her story to tell.